Imagine you're locked inside a room, your hands tied. In front of you stand doctors in white coats. They smile as they approach, but in their hands are knives, injections, and cold instruments. You think they're here to save your life, but in reality, they're here to take it. This isn't a horror movie. This was real. A nightmare written into history under the name Unit 731. One of the darkest, most terrifying chapters of human civilization. The story of Unit 731 begins in the 1930s, during Japan's aggressive push to expand its empire across Asia. After invading and occupying Manchuria in northeast China, Japan established what looked like a medical research institute. Officially, it was called the Kwantung Army Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Harmless in name, deadly in reality. Behind this innocent title hid one of the most horrifying projects in modern history. This was the brainchild of General Shiro Ishii, a doctor and scientist in the Japanese Imperial Army. Ishii was ambitious. He believed that the future of warfare would not be decided only by bombs and bullets, but by biological and chemical weapons. And he had a chilling idea. If experiments were done on living humans instead of animals, Japan would gain scientific data that no other nation could obtain. The Japanese military agreed. Thus, Unit 731 was born. The facility was constructed near Harbin, Manchuria. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary research compound. Inside, however, it was a vast death factory, made up of more than 150 buildings, laboratories, prisons, surgical theaters, and even crematoriums to dispose of bodies. The prisoners brought into Unit 731 were referred to as maruta, a Japanese word meaning logs. To the scientists, these people weren't humans. They were nothing more than objects, resources to be used and discarded. The victims included Chinese civilians, farmers, workers, women, and even children. Some Russian and Korean prisoners were also captured, and occasionally Western prisoners of war. Once inside the facility, there was no escape. Prisoners became test subjects in experiments so cruel that even today they shake the soul. Historians estimate that over 3,000 people were directly experimented on inside Unit 731. But if we include the wider use of biological weapons, entire villages, infected with plague and cholera, the death toll rises into the hundreds of thousands. Unit 731 was never about medicine, healing, or prevention. It was about building a new kind of weapon, the science of death. Inside Unit 731, science became indistinguishable from torture. The experiments carried out here are considered some of the most barbaric in history. The most infamous was vivisection. Prisoners were cut open while fully conscious. No anesthesia was ever used. Doctors wanted to study how diseases spread inside the body in real time. A victim might be injected with plague, and then days later, their abdomen would be sliced open to observe the damage on their organs, while they screamed in unimaginable agony. Next came disease testing. Scientists deliberately infected prisoners with some of the world's deadliest pathogens: plague, cholera, smallpox, anthrax. Victims were monitored closely to see how long it took for symptoms to appear, how quickly they died, and how the disease spread between people. Sometimes multiple infections were given to a single prisoner, just to push the human body to its breaking point. Another nightmare was extreme condition experiments. Prisoners were exposed to freezing temperatures until their limbs were solid with frostbite. Their arms or legs would then be thawed in boiling water, just so scientists could study the stages of tissue death. Others were placed in pressure chambers, where air pressure was raised so high that their bodies literally burst. And then there were weapons tests. New grenades, flamethrowers, and bombs were tested directly on live human beings. Prisoners were tied to stakes as explosives were detonated nearby. Soldiers and scientists calmly observed from a distance, taking notes on blast damage, wounds, and how long it took for the victims to die. Every day, new prisoners were brought in. Every day, new screams echoed through the walls. To the scientists, this was just another set of data points. Charts were filled, notebooks were updated, as if they were recording a normal medical study. It wasn't. This was torture disguised as science. Over 3,000 direct victims suffered these horrors. But the true toll of Unit 731 reaches far beyond. Japanese forces released plague-infected fleas into Chinese villages, leading to outbreaks that killed an estimated 200,000 civilians. Entire communities were wiped out, not by bombs but by invisible germs. For the Japanese military, Unit 731 was not just an experiment. It was a weapon of war. The idea was terrifyingly simple. Instead of spending huge resources on traditional weapons, why not use disease? A single container of germs could wipe out entire cities. And so, Unit 731 became the heart of Japan's biological warfare program. Prisoners inside were test subjects, while outside, field experiments were conducted. Plague-infested fleas were released over Chinese towns. Food and water supplies were deliberately contaminated. In some cases, bombs filled with bacteria were dropped from airplanes. The results were catastrophic. Historians estimate over 200,000 deaths from these biological attacks. But the world remained unaware. How? Because Japan shrouded Unit 731 in total secrecy. Victims were executed after experiments. Their bodies were burned in crematoriums, leaving no trace. Survivors were almost non-existent. To the outside world, the facility remained a water purification unit. Even Japanese citizens had no idea of the horrors being committed in their name. The scientists and doctors working in Unit 731 believed they were serving a higher cause, Japan's future dominance. They saw themselves not as murderers but as patriots, sacrificing human lives for science and victory. As World War II dragged on and Japan faced defeat, efforts were made to erase all evidence. In 1945, as Soviet forces closed in, Unit 731 was dismantled. Buildings were destroyed, documents burned, and prisoners executed to ensure no witnesses survived. But the truth could not stay hidden forever. When the war ended, fragments of evidence and survivor testimonies began to surface, and the world was horrified. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the crimes of Unit 731 began to leak out. The Soviet Union captured some of the personnel and held trials, exposing gruesome details of the program. But the biggest twist came from the United States. American military leaders quickly realized that the data from Unit 731 was unlike anything they had. This was direct human experimentation on biological and chemical warfare, information they could never ethically gather themselves. To them, this data was priceless. And so, instead of prosecuting the scientists, the United States struck a secret deal. In exchange for their research, many of the Unit 731 doctors and leaders were given immunity from war crimes. Yes, the same men who dissected prisoners alive, who unleashed plague on civilians, walked free. General Shiro Ishii himself escaped justice entirely. Some of the Unit 731 scientists went on to become respected doctors and professors in post-war Japan. They lived normal lives, even honored careers, while their victims were forgotten. The hypocrisy was staggering. The West condemned Nazi doctors at the Nuremberg trials, yet quietly protected Japanese war criminals because their research was useful. Human suffering had been turned into a bargaining chip. The Soviets, meanwhile, held their own Khabarovsk trials in 1949, where some Unit 731 staff were convicted. But the majority of perpetrators lived without punishment. The horrors of Unit 731 were buried under political convenience and the race for scientific advantage. Today, Unit 731 is remembered as one of history's darkest examples of science without ethics. What was done in the name of progress was nothing short of mass murder. In Harbin, China, a museum now stands at the site of the facility. Inside, visitors can see the ruins, preserved instruments, and photographs of victims walking through. One is confronted with a chilling reminder. Human beings were once treated as nothing more than laboratory animals. The legacy of Unit 731 is also a warning for science itself. Much of the data gathered through these atrocities was secretly studied by the US and the Soviet Union. In a way, human suffering was repurposed into scientific progress. And this raises one of history's most uncomfortable questions. If knowledge is gained through cruelty, should it ever be used? Unit 731 shows us that science without morality is dangerous. Knowledge is power, but without ethics, that power becomes monstrous. In the end, Unit 731 is not just a story of war crimes. It is a mirror held up to humanity, forcing us to ask, how far will we go for power? And at what point do we stop being human? Unit 731 is a scar on history, a chapter of horror disguised as research. And though the screams of its victims have long faded, their suffering continues to echo as a warning. In war, when ethics die, humanity dies with them.
The case may be closed, but criminology never sleeps. Like and subscribe at join Criminology and step deeper into the dark with us.